In April 1967, North Vietnamese Army units opened their biggest offensive of the Vietnam War. Their role was to draw American forces into the remotest parts of South Vietnam, far away from the populated areas. The hope was that the main attacks, scheduled for early 1968, would find the Americans deployed in all the wrong places. Fighting began at the end of March when a strategic Marine patrol ran into an ambush near one of the strategic hills that lay between the fire bases of Khe Sanh and Con Thien. Dozens of Marines were killed during this first brief and unforeseen combat. The North Vietnamese had by then assembled nearly 2,000 men near the base at Con Thien, and almost every day they hit the Marines with artillery, rockets, and mortars. In the rugged countryside around, there were savage battles as patrols from each side clashed in what became known as the hill fights. During these battles, 160 Marines were killed and 700 wounded. The NVA resisted with such courage that as a mark of respect, the Marines, who usually called the Vietcong Charlie, rechristened them Mr. Cong. But in the end, it was the sheer weight of American firepower that turned the tables at Con Thien. Repeated NVA assaults were broken, and more than 900 North Vietnamese soldiers were killed by Marine artillery, massive bombing, and the guns of naval vessels offshore. After the battles at Con Thien, the next clashes were near the border with Cambodia in the south. At Song Bay, in late October 1967, a South Vietnamese Army Battalion was attacked by the North Vietnamese 88th Regiment. The attackers were driven off with help from heavy American airstrikes. 2 days earlier, Loc Ninh, another provincial capital, had been stormed by the elite 273rd Regiment of the 9th Vitcong Division, supported by the 65th Regiment of the NVA. Reinforcements from the South Vietnamese 5th Division and the American 1st fought for several days and shattered the NVA Regiment, leaving over 850 NVA and NLF dead. The fiercest of all the border battles was near an American camp at Dak To in the Central Highlands, which had been massively reinforced following a tip-off from an NVA deserter. By November 1967, the 1st NVA Division, reinforced by 2 independent regiments, faced the American 4th Infantry Division, the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and a Mechanized Task Force. Bloody battles would rage around Dak To for the whole month. Of all the desperate encounters of the Battle of Dak To, the most costly for both sides was the fight for Hill 875. In the highlands, whoever controlled the hills could rain down mortar and artillery fire on the valleys. The task of taking Hill 875 fell to 2 American battalions, 1 airborne and 1 from the 4th Infantry Division. Supporting them were fighters, B-52 bombers, and artillery, blasting the enemy defenses with high explosives and napalm. 170,000 artillery shells were fired on the enemy during this battle, and the fighter bombers flew 2,100 missions. The North Vietnamese defenders were so well dug in and so determined that the Americans were forced to launch repeated assaults, punctuated by yet more airstrikes, before they could reach the crest of the hill. It was a desperate and often nightmarish battle. It took a full week to capture Hill 875. The assaults cost more than 150 dead and 400 wounded, bringing American casualties at Dak To to almost 350, with just under 1,000 wounded. The North Vietnamese Army had lost 1,200 men. In December 1967, the dry season had just begun in the southern provinces. Every year, that was the signal for intense Vietcong activity as the guerrillas moved troops and supplies into place for their next offensive.